What this one's about is tax facts. We've taken a lot of general information now we're going to focus it on specifically on taxes. It's the one common thing that, regardless of what's going on, it affects all of us. So what we wanted to look at that was, why was there a need for income tax? We need to really answer a lot of these questions, because you sit there and say, well, if I don't pay taxes, how's our country going to run? Why do we need taxes? We're told we need taxes for this, that, and everything else. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to go through a lot of the different theories out there, some of the illusions that we're being taught, like it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, it's voluntary. We're going to put an answer, try to answer each one of those questions, so as you're trying to either explain this to somebody or you get exposed to some other information, you'll be able to answer for yourself what the reality of that question or that other person's asking. So I think why the need for income tax, to answer that, we could spend hours just on that first concept. I think by looking at a few quotes from leaders of either this country or mainly the United States, we can realize there is an illusion going on here. Everything's done so someone can make a lot of profit. Well, first when we talked about they, who are they? Well, if you really want to give they some identity, you could call them the world bankers, okay? But let's look at this quote from the Prime Minister of Canada, William Mackenzie King. Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to government and recognized as its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talks of sovereignty of Parliament and of democracy is idle and futile. Once a nation parts with the control of its credit, it matters not who makes the law. Usury, once in control, will wreck the nation. So that's starting to really fit into what we learned, like, just this morning and stuff like that. That's the main problem. Our federal government has the exclusive jurisdiction to print and issue currency. They gave it up in this Bank Act to these, foreign power brokers, and that's it. We need to, that is the key to the whole thing. When that happens within our society, we know we're on the course home. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, okay? I'm a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. He is the fellow in power when the Federal Reserve on December 23rd passed the Federal Reserve Act. 3 congressmen were left behind on December 23rd to pass the Federal Reserve Act. The whole thing was a staged scenario. Everybody left for Christmas break on the 22nd of December. They did not officially close Congress. 3 men sat on the board of Congress and passed the Federal Reserve Act. Okay, and he was in charge of the country at that time. A great industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small amount of dominant men. Again, they know what's going on to a very high degree. And what happened, it's neat when you look at the history of the United States, is they were very aware of this. Thomas Jefferson was a great president. He fought these guys tooth and nail. And it was there's a great video out there called The Money Masters, and we can get somebody access to it if they really want. It'll take you back to pre-Roman civilization time, all the way through to today's thing, and show you the battle and the fight between a few men trying to control this concept of money, create this illusion of money, and put attach credit aspects to it, all the way up through the American history. And although there's not much in there about Canada, we're very parallel. Ours just happened so fast. Thomas Jefferson, the privately owned central bank is an institution of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and the form of our Constitution. If the people allow the private banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all their property until their children will wake up homeless on a continent their forefathers conquered. Okay, that's amazing. What was that, 100 years ago, 150 years ago? That's exactly what's facing now. We are in the curve of what's happening there. So we've isolated, we've acknowledged the problem, right? And I think that's what, and I think years ago when we actually realized the potential of some of this information, is like, well, what good is it? How do you change a system? How do you change a country? We're not going to do it by going to the leaders and saying change. They already know this stuff, and they're too afraid to change. Or they're getting paid off, they sold their soul for X amount of dollars and they don't want to change. So it's up to us to change it, and we do that by getting ourselves educated and by taking back from them what they've been taking from us, keeping what's ours, right? Here's some quotes from some of these leading financiers. Sir Joseph Stant, who was the President of the Bank of England in 1920, the second richest man in England at the time. Banking was conceived in ingenuity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create deposits. And with a flick of a pen, they will create enough deposits to buy it back. However, take it away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear. They ought to disappear, for this would be a happy and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create deposits. And this was at the time when there was still this concept of fractional reserve, where they actually had to have deposits before they could lend money out. Guess what? They don't need any deposits now to lend out whatever they want. We have evolved to extreme thing. Meyer Rothschilds, you know, the emblem of the Royal Bank, that is the Rothschilds family symbol there. Banking dynasty, he's one of the main, the original they. Give me control of the nation's money and I care not who makes her laws. It's very simple. He had it down in a nutshell, you know. We looked at this, basically the same article, but it was 10 years later in 1934, the Bankers, excerpt from the Bankers Associated Magazine. Here's how it originally came out in 1924. Capital must be protected in every possible way. Debts must be collected, mortgaged, foreclosed as rapidly as possible. When through the process of law the common people lose their homes, they will become more docile and more easily governed through the strong arm of government applied by the central power of wealth under leading financiers. These truths are well known among our principal men who are now engaged in forming an imperialism to govern the world. Okay? By dividing the voter through the political party system, starting to all make sense, we can get them to expend their energies in fighting for questions of no importance. It is thus by discrete action we can secure for ourselves that which has been so well planned and so successfully accomplished. Okay, back in 1924, we're just seeing the, how would you say, the results of the plans, this one world globalized system. Horace Greeley, while boasting of our noble deeds, we are careful to conceal the ugly fact that by an iniquitous money system we have nationalized a system of oppression which, though more refined, is not less cruel than the old system of chattel slavery. Okay? But the advantage we have here, instead of the old system of chattel slavery, is we have to volunteer to play the game. And that's what we were learning, the rules of the game, the illusion of the game. And hey, we don't have to do it unless we want to do it. Here's this little cartoon. Sort of puts all these words into a little big picture for you. Okay, if the country creates the money for the people, no more debts, taxes, unemployment, and bankruptcies. And that's really when we actually take back, the federal government takes back its exclusive jurisdiction to print and issue currency, we can now borrow off the national wealth of this country, interest-free. It is the interest. 95% of every dollar they collect just goes to pay interest on money that was created of nothing. You think we're ever going to get out of debt? I don't think so. So, now we want to get down to this personal thing of income tax. Okay, what is motivating people to step out of their comfort zone, battle the fear they have inside, to go and seek information about this? If you look at this, this is out of the, when Reform Party, before they turned to be the Alliance, they were slamming Paul Martin there, and they were digging up some reality. And here's some just experts. Everybody has a story. I think we all have our own different story. The challenge up to now, we've been taught to be ashamed of our story. Okay, so we all hide. Nobody wants to tell how much they owe Revenue Canada. Hello, every second person on your block is in some form or another behind the 8 ball with them. It's part of the game, right? And if they're not, they're just really, really, really good slaves. Probably they have a very high level of fear. So pay raise ripoff last year. And Laura Horsch, a teacher who worked for a private school board in Medicine Hat, Alberta, got a $1,000 raise. She was hoping to put the raise away for her retirement. After taxes, Mrs. Horsch's $1,000 pay raise left her with just $2.67 each month to put away for her golden years. Okay? Now, was she happy to get her raise? I literally know people that have turned down promotions and raises because they take home less money. Right? Here's another one, getting milk dry ripoff. Stephen Bayes, 31-year-old dairy farmer of Mitchell, Ontario, earned just over $20,000 and yet had to resort to his RSPs to pay his tax bill. He writes, the current Liberal government must lower small businesses and personal taxes now or I will not be farming next year. Gee, doesn't that correlate with that executive orders of the U.S.? Take a look what's happened to our farms. Who owns our farms now? We had farms that were handed down generation to generation to generation. You force those farms into bankruptcy through all this red tape and bureaucracy, they end up owning them. Okay? Single mom ripoff. Idle Piper, a single mom from Vernon, British Columbia, who works 2 jobs to support her 3 children. She says she is taxed so heavily that she'd be further ahead financially if she just quit working and collected social assistance. Now this is a great system of taxation when you're taking the natural creative ability and the motivation a person has, and you beat it to the ground so much you're going, I give up, I might as well just, you know. And that's this, when you start getting to the personal attachment of how this actually affects human beings. The only problem is we just take it personally because these guys don't have to eat. Okay, so completely, utterly a ripoff. Toronto Police Constable wrote, 1999 I grossed $61,000. And after taxes and other deductions took home $34,000. Every other purchase had a further 15% PST GST. When are we ever going to get a break? And here's the reality of it. Okay, 61,000 sounds like a lot. I guarantee you when he's out at a party talking to his friends, he says, yeah, I make $61,000 a year. Because everybody's ashamed of what reality is. We're afraid to say the emperor's nude, right? This is what reality is. Try raising a family, paying a mortgage, having 2, 3 kids in a comfortable life with dignity if you're the only one working. So what is done? It's forced both to try to get back to the 61. And this one's cute, this overtime ripoff. During one pay period, Paul Meyer, a structural engineer from Montrose, British Columbia, worked a half-hour overtime. The half hour of overtime increased my gross pay by $19.33. Amazingly, this resulted in my federal income tax increasing by $20.13. In effect, I paid John Critchin 80 cents for the privilege of working a half-hour overtime. Okay, and that's the reality. And you know, he probably doesn't know exactly what he said, but he said it dead on. He paid John Critchin 80 cents for the privilege to work. Because if he knew how to work, it wouldn't become a privilege, it'd become a right. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at here on that. But that's the sad part about it, is like, if we're trying to create a prosperous country, a country where people can live and create a comfortable living, why do we have a tax system that says, hey, if you work a little too hard, we're going to penalize you more, right? Because when you understand this whole thing of control, last thing you want is people to access their true potential, who they really are. That's the last thing you want. So there's a, you know, I think, you know, we all have our personal stories, and some of them are way worse. I know a few that are way worse than some stuff like that. Those were probably watered down for the media. Here's another, and there's a lot of groups out there doing phenomenal studies on this. This information's all over the place. This is the Vanier Institute of the Family. Current state of the Canadian family finances, year 2000. You'll start seeing a trend happening here. Family incomes edge ahead of a decade earlier. Sounds good, right? Well, let's check the reality. Driven by the sustained economic recovery, average family incomes after income tax jumped 3.7% in 1998. This balance enables incomes to edge ahead of a decade earlier by a mere 1.7%. Most family types gained in 1998. Incomes of unattached individuals remained well below the 1989 peak. So what would cause a family's income to increase yet an individual's to decrease? Because now you got more people out working, throwing it into the same pot. Okay? Families did it with more workers and hours, but at the same pay. The recent improvement in family income stems totally from the fact that workers are putting in longer hours and more family members are working. Real hourly earnings have not increased since 1994. Imagine if you had a country of slaves, why give them more than they need just to survive, wake up, feed them, come back to slave another day? When you look at this true concept of slavery, it's like they had a choice. They either house you and feed you and do everything for you, let you go, pretend you're free, and let you do it yourself. Okay? The poverty rate improved since 1996. Low-income poverty rate on an after-tax income basis among families fell to 9.1 in 1989 from 11 in 1996. Even so, rates remain above the rates a decade earlier. Okay, so when you look at short-term statistics, oh, things are getting better. No, no. Look at the long-term downward spiral. It's part of the plan. It's part of it's what they need to happen. 5 million families got a smaller piece of the pie in the 90s. Over a decade, about 5 million families saw their income shrink, while 3.3 million experienced increases. Okay, well, some people are doing better then. In 1989, the richest 1/5 of families got 37% of the family pie after the income. and this rose to almost 39 in 1989. What we're starting to see is what's happening in remember we talked about the middle dictatorships, the division between the rich, the elimination of the middle class, the elimination of the backbone, which is the true power of a lot of these free countries, the people that are actually making the country work, right, who are using their own free will and their own creative powers to actually generate and produce incomes, right, produce actual product for this country. Spending on recreation tops the list again. Spending on recreation, education, entertainment, and cultural items rose at a rapid pace during each of the last 3 years and stood at a 31% above the level of spending a decade earlier. Increasing incomes among higher income families was behind much of the advance. The division is getting wider and wider. So so annual savings plummet, debts climb, and bankruptcies soar. Households on average saved $1,664 in 1998, which is down from $6,250 a decade earlier. Okay, this coincides with the rising debt loads and the huge jump in consumer bankruptcies over the same period. When was it? GST was passed in 1992. Now we've all were told it was for paying off the debt. Well, the debt has not been paid off. The debt's still climbing. One statistic that they don't want to attach to it, ever since GST was brought into force, we've had record bankruptcies 8 years consecutive. I haven't checked the 9 years. Because actually someone at lunch was just telling us of someone who got this GST backdate audit for something that was not even attached to. Wiped them right out. Okay? So maybe its whole focus wasn't to pay off a debt, because mathematically can't do it anyways. Maybe it was to attach more control to the system, so because up until that point, you know what, they could only track products. Once you attach GST, now you can track labor, right? It actually attaches onto services, right? Now you can monitor everybody and everything that they're doing. So we're going to see, is everything hopeless? Is this reality? We have nothing to do. I think for us to understand what taxes are, we have to actually, there's hundreds of them. In Canada, I heard there's like anywhere between 180, 200 different taxes. Which ones are we talking about? It's real simple when you just break them down and divide them. There's two fields of taxation. So we're going to start looking at the fields. It doesn't matter what name they're given. They're either a direct tax or an indirect tax. Okay, and we saw that division happen again within the B&A Act, within the Constitution, right? A direct tax, one that is imposed directly upon property, according to its value. It is generally spoken as that of a property tax or ad valorem. An indirect tax, a tax upon some right or privilege or corporate franchise. Ordinarily, all taxes paid primarily by a person can shift the burden upon someone else, or who are under no legal compulsion to pay them, are considered indirect taxes. So those are the two fields of taxation. Okay? In the field of indirect tax, we have one thing called an excise tax. It's an inland imposition, an inland tax, an internal tax, paid sometimes upon the consumption of a commodity and frequently upon a retail sale. An excise is an impost for a license to pursue a certain calling or to deal in commodities or to exercise particular franchises. Okay, now we all think we know what this word franchises means. We're going to look at that at the bottom of the page here. Ad valorem tax, according to value. That's what GST is. It's an ad valorem tax. Okay, the term ad valorem means a tax or duty upon the value of an article or thing subject to taxation. So here's how GST works in relation. Here we have GST and PST, okay, in our province. So one's charged federally, one's charged provincially. So we look at GST and we go, well, GST, they can't double tax me on the property. This is how slick the game is. PST, it has a purpose, and I haven't done enough research. I think it's reasonable, it's fair. They don't tax necessities, this, that. We need taxes for our government, right? So I haven't really done any research on that. But GST, if you look at it, PST is actually a tax on the property, the pen itself. So if this pen's $1, or right, it's 7%. GST is not a tax on the pen. It's a tax on the value of the pen, i.e. another 7%. What's the value of the pen? You just established that by paying $1 for it, right? Well, the value is $1 now that's established. We can charge you a tax on the dollar. And that's how it's structured, so that they're not double taxing the same item. Estate tax. Now remember about property rights? Okay, a tax upon the right to transfer. Remember, you're allowed to do with your property whatever you want without any control or taking away from. Well, how can they make this? a tax on the right to transfer, while a succession or legacy tax is a tax upon the right to receive. So for some reason they have created a system now when you pass on and you want to transfer your property over to somebody else, they're able to tax it. But yet, if you know who you were, they can't do it. And if you get things structured right, they can't legally do it. Okay? Inheritance tax, same thing but reversed. The tax on the transfer or passing of estate or property, not on the property itself. You see, they are very aware they cannot tax personal property. They know that very well. Okay? But on the right to acquire it by descendant or testamentary gift. Okay, so when we're gonna talk about income tax, I actually focus a little bit on GST because it's real simple, that one. But you can do additional research and start unspinning these. They all run the same. The game is very simple. They got a set of rules, and once you figure out the rules in the game, it's over. Okay. Let's look at this excise tax to exercise a particular franchise. So what is a franchise tax? Okay, we think franchises like McDonald's or Burger King, something like this. But what's the real essence of a franchise tax? A tax on the franchise of a corporation. That is on the right and privilege of carrying on a business in the character of a corporation, for the purposes for which it was created and for the conditions which surround it. So what's a franchise? Franchise is a special privilege conferred by government on individual or corporations, and which does not belong to the citizens of the country, generally of common right. In England, it was defined as a royal privilege in the hands of a subject. Okay, we're going to show you what this really plugs into, this franchise thing. Basically, it's a special privilege granted to you by the people in power at this time. So basically, when someone says taxes now, instead of letting know which one of the hundreds you're talking about, it's either direct or indirect, and you can start focusing your research from there. Now we're going to focus that down then and look at income tax. What is income tax? Okay, how many people think here when you're being charged income tax, they're actually taking it from your property? You figure you went to work, right? You worked 2 weeks, you got a paycheck, that is now your property, yet they took your property, and that's what's really ticking you off, right? Well, let's see what income tax really is. I'm just going to jump to the highlight part. An income tax is not levied upon property, funds, or profits, but upon the right of an individual or corporation to receive incomes or profits. Well, up until today, we've never saw anything that said we needed a special granted right to go to work. We actually found out we have a right to an unmolested pursuit of a trade or occupation. So what's going on here? Okay, so we're going to switch and look at some of these questions. I know there's some people here that has been studying this for a while, and here's one of the questions. There's a lot of organizations or groups out there who look at income tax as unconstitutional. Okay, because as we learned earlier, federal government can only charge an indirect tax, provincial government charges the direct tax, and we all feel income tax is the direct tax. Remember about statutes and emotions? They don't mix. Okay? Section 91, exclusive power of the federal government. Raising of money by any mode or system of taxation. Section 92, exclusive legislative authority of the provinces. Direct taxation within the province and raising revenue for provincial purposes. Okay? So if they already have exclusive jurisdiction over direct taxation, that only leaves exclusive jurisdiction over indirect taxation. Okay? We'll see if we can build this with so much information you cannot do, because here's an argument people go, yeah, but it's only in the province for raising revenue for provincial purposes. Okay, well that wasn't the intent. That was added in after. For the reason is, it prevented Alberta from raising a direct tax in Newfoundland to give to Saskatchewan. It's just isolated, but it was the field of taxation that was focused within that. Okay, so let's see what CCRA, this is out of their fact sheets. You go to the website, or if you get in trouble with them, they'll send you one of these. The fact sheet, for this reason, it's this whole thing about Constitution, okay? For this reason, the CCRA wishes to address some misleading statements and myths about Canada's tax laws and the way they are administered by CCRA. Myth 1, it is a myth that the federal income tax is unconstitutional. This myth is based on the faulty argument that the Canadian Constitution gives the power of direct taxation, such as income tax. Now, when we read that on the surface, it sounds like they just said the federal government has the authority, such as income tax. Okay, remember what we learned yesterday about capitalization, person, place, or thing? Direct taxation is a thing. right here now, I don't know what English structure you would put to it. Direct taxation just means any form of taxation going directly somewhere. It's directional. It's not a thing anymore. They understand this. See, this is how they use these rules against us, the simple little things. So the myth is that the Supreme Court of Canada supposedly confirmed this position in the decision of 1950. According to this myth, individuals can legitimately refuse to pay income tax to the federal government because it's unconstitutional. Remember this word individual, what it normally means? What does it mean when Revenue Canada says it? And that's what we talked about. You need to follow the source of authority. When someone speaks, what is actually coming out of their mouth? Where did they get the authority to use that word, and then what does that word mean when they use it? Okay? Because when they use it, it doesn't mean you. The facts. The Constitution, Section 91 says, this is what they're telling you, this is the way it is, people. The federal government can raise money by any mode or system of taxation. Section 92 says the provinces can both direct taxes within a province to raise a revenue for provincial purposes. As a result, while federal and provincial taxing powers overlap, the federal government can levy both indirect and direct taxations, including income tax. That sounds pretty straightforward. That's it, black and white. They just laid it out there for you. Notice how there's a massive elimination and non-use of any capitalization in there. There's a lot of implication. You're going to apply all your implications on which federal government they're talking about, which provincial government they're talking about, section of what are they talking about, okay, which constitution. When you understand the legal intricacies, things that we weren't talking about this constitution, we were talking about one we made up for our buddies, okay, but we'll hang on to this, because right here we have proof that they're telling you that the federal government and the provincial government's powers overlap. Okay? We just studied what watertight compartments look like, but they're saying no, they overlap. You know, it's just the way it is. Okay, it's just the way it happens to be. So we'll see. We'll see if we can expand on that, because this is the biggest argument out there. Is like so many people feel this thing's so unconstitutional, and it should be dealt with that way. Through my years of studying this, I've watched all these court cases go up to the Supreme Court on this argument. They get to the front door and they shut them down. I'm thinking, why do they keep shutting it down? Maybe they know something. When you switch your thinking from they're big, bad, and ugly and a bunch of crooks and stupid and just mean this to these guys, what they're doing is not right, but they're smart. They got all your money to study and keep paying these guys to do what they want with it. Maybe they figured out a way of skirting the system. So on the subject of unconstitutional, what we want to do is go back through history. Go and find out what the intent of Parliament was when they wrote the Constitution. Remember, no act gets written unless there's a problem and a mischief. We found out Canada, they wanted to join the provinces. There was the problem, here's the remedy. Okay? We're going to go through some of these things about direct taxation and the distinction. This is November 1864, November 28th, Alexander Galt, Minister of Finance of Canada. Before it was a true country. That was probably Ontario then. In general terms, he would add that the central government would have the power of raising money by all other modes and systems of taxation. The power of taxation had been confined to the general legislature, and there was only one method left for the local governments if their own resources became exhausted, and that was direct taxation. So what he's saying is to the central government, they were given the power of indirect taxing. The only thing left for the provinces was direct taxation. So right there they've made a division. 1865. All that comes to the Confederate government, the federal government, are simply the duties from excise and customs on goods imported from foreign countries. Simply the revenue from customs and excise and nothing more. Okay? Now, this 1867, this is the second reading of the B&A Act. Okay? Not only did it pass the second reading of the B&A Act, which we actually have a full copy of it, but it also passed the third reading, which then changed it from a bill into an act, which is what we have today. The principal subjects reserved to the local legislatures, to the provinces, are the sale and management of public lands, the control of their hospitals, asylums, charitable and municipal institutions, the raising of money by direct taxation. The several provinces which are now free to raise a revenue as they may think fit. See, because before we had a federal government, they had all power of taxation, right? They surrendered to the central parliament all powers under this head, except that of direct taxation. Okay, and then he goes on to say further on in the second reading, as I have said, it is proposed that the provinces shall surrender to the central parliament all powers of raising revenue, except by direct taxation. So whoever wrote that myth sheet in CCRA, there's a lot of illusion going on there, because there is no implied. This is right out of the Hansards and stuff. This is as powerful. This is history. Okay, we actually took this document to our MLA here in town. He don't like us much anymore. And this is when we were arguing on constitutional things. I mean, there's so much information. You read this and you can think, wow. And if you think income tax is a tax on your property, I mean, you're going to be very headstrong that it's unconstitutional. So at that point, we actually took it to him and we showed him the second reading of the B&A. Look what it says here, right? A blind dog with a note can figure this one out, right? He looks at it and goes, where'd you get that? Okay, he was, before he became the MLM or whatever, he was a lawyer. Okay, so you begin to wonder who's teaching them what. We'll go on to say, with the exception of agriculture and immigration, there is no subject matter over which there can exist concurrent powers of legislation. Okay, 1894. In the Imperial Act, the B&A Act, by which they enabled the provinces of North America to federate into one Dominion in 1867, the Dominion government, the federal, by the Imperial Act, was expressly forbidden levying any direct taxation. Okay, 1902. Article 43 of these resolutions, talking about the Quebec resolution, reserved to the provincial legislatures the right of direct taxation. And it was really transferred by Article 64, comprised only of indirect taxation. This argument in the early formations of our country was really clarified. And it makes real perfect sense. You got two fields of taxation. We'll give you indirect. Indirect allowed them to collect 80% of the revenue running through this country. At this time in our history, even the concept of income tax wasn't even there. What are you going to do? Income tax trappers and loggers and people that live in the bush and the mountains? Right? Income tax was the last resort. I got a document as the 1984 Provincial Dominion Conference, where Premier Patel said they would not have ever had to enter the field of indirect of income tax had the federal government not invaded their jurisdiction of taxation. So even he thought they were invading their jurisdiction of taxation. I believe at that time they truly were, because that was before 1950. Okay, but that forced our provinces to start charging income tax so they could, because all their money was being sucked up by the federal government. Okay, so now let's look at this from the government's perspective. Canada Customs and Revenue Agency, let's see if they'll tell us what income tax really is. Okay, this is their own act. The permission slip they got to be created. You understand? We have to create them through some form. They're just a creation, so you know where they rank on the scale of capacity, right? The powers and duties and functions. They cannot do anything unless it gives them permission to do it. Okay, we'll just zip all the way down through here. The customs matters and duties, stamp duties, internal taxes, unless otherwise provided, including income tax. So finally, this is the first time I've actually seen anybody, I've actually wrote them letters to say, please tell me what income tax is, you know, when you're searching for knowledge and truth. So they've told you right in the act themselves, income tax is an internal tax. And notice the ing on including, okay? So now we take all that information, we use cut and paste on your computer, we put all the pieces together and we track see if we can establish is the income tax unconstitutional. We now know it's an internal tax, okay, an inland, okay? So what's an inland imposition? Equivalency of an internal tax. Imposition is taxes, inland internal, okay, which is now classified as an excise tax, which is a tax on particular franchise. Well, if you were granted special privilege from the government to go to work, that would be classed as a franchise tax, okay, which is a tax, which is an income tax. It's not a tax on your property. It's either tax on a corporation or upon a privilege or right. So therefore making it an indirect tax, which is a tax upon some right or privilege or corporate franchise. So I'll leave the question with you. Is income tax unconstitutional? I think it's no, it's an excise tax. That's how it's laid out. It's not a tax on your property. Therefore making it constitutional. So going to spend, like I did, 6 years getting mad at them because they charge direct tax could be a lot of waste of time. I've been there, done that. Okay, so here's another question. I think I actually learned this in school. In school, I was taught income tax is only supposed to be temporary. I think we all probably have heard that. That's a very common thing, piece of common knowledge. What's the reality behind that? Was it supposed to be temporary? Right? Was there a preset date that this stuff was supposed to stop? This is a letter, Committee of the Whole, July 25th, 1917, Sir Thomas White, who was the Minister of Finance at the time. You want to listen to propaganda? This is cool. I'll read this in his way. Mr. Chairman, and he's having a speech at the committee there. I desire today to lay before this committee proposals for a national measure of income taxation. Hitherto we have relied upon duties and customs of excise, postal rates, and other miscellaneous sources of revenue, like the law said they had to. Canada has been and will continue during the lifetime of those present today be a country inviting immigration. I have therefore thought it desirable that we should not be known to the outside world as a country of heavy individual taxation. What are we known to the outside world now? Okay, he goes on to say, this during the war, okay? We are, however, confronted with grave conditions arising out of the war. The time has arrived when we must resort to direct taxation. I'm confident, Mr. Chairman, that the people of Canada, whose patriotism during this war has been so often and so nobly proven, will, in light of the present conditions which call for it, cheerfully accept the burden and the sacrifice of this additional taxation. We cannot see very far ahead in these days. We do not know how long this war will last. We do not know what the attitudes of the people of this country will be upon the many questions, social, industrial, financial, and fiscal. Therefore, I have placed no time limit upon this measure, but merely have placed upon Hansard's the suggestion that a year or two after the war is over, the measure should be reviewed by the Minister of Finance of the day with the view of judging whether it is suitable to the conditions which then prevail. So it had no initial intent to be temporary. It was the smoke and mirrors to bring. We know this got brought in right after the War Measures Act, which allowed them then to invade the jurisdiction of direct taxation. At that time, but it did have a temporary clause on it. Alexander McLean, he was the opposition finance critic at the time, he goes, I have no doubt that once we've embarked upon it, income tax, the judgment of the country, not so much the people of the country, will be that it should be continued for many years to come. Okay, so it was never designed to be temporary. It's part of the big program. They know in order for them to control this world, they have to restrict you. It's not even money. You imagine if they have a printing press, it's not the money anymore. Money's nothing if they can make it out of nothing. It's the last thing they want is you to actually reach your full potential until actually they need to control you out there, right? They need, how can you have one person in power if everybody's equal? Okay, I mean they've taken care of the money issue a long time ago, 1991. Just give me a printing press and I'm rich. Okay, here's another question that pops up every once in a while. Oh, it's illegal because there's no enacting clause or there's no preamble. Well, we learned that like this morning. This is what it says, enacting clause. Okay, enacting clause of an act may be in the following form. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. Okay, now a lot of them, they say, well, there's no preamble. There's no preamble in here. Okay, the order of clauses. The enacting clause of an act shall follow the preamble. So it must follow the preamble, if any. Okay, now in this book you will not find the enacting clause, you will not find the preamble. So a lot of people are saying, well, show me the real law because this book doesn't have it. With a little bit of study and you understand the joiner and what's been created, this is the Income Tax Act that we still use today with modifications and amendments. The 1917 War Income Tax Act. Okay, here's your preamble if you really want one, if you really need one, which you don't, and here's your enacting clause. It's all laid out separate there. Okay, and I'll show you down here. We understand this concept of persons and individuals and stuff now. Person means any individual or person. Okay, so at that point, if we assume individual is a natural person, it did include a natural person and then an artificial person at that point. Because they were able to, at this point it didn't bother you. The average person had to make what, I forget what it is, like $10,000 a year. It would be equivalent of $300,000 of ours to pay like 4% or something. Right? It was no big issue at the point, but that wasn't the short-term goal. See, they're very disciplined. They're not going for everything now. They're very patient. Okay? Okay, so that should help with that argument. Is it legal? It's like, I do have a letter at home that you can get a lawfully authorized copy of the Income Tax Act, because that's another argument people use, is like, show me the real law. Well, if you want to pay 35 cents a page, they'll send you one. They sent me a letter saying, we highly suggest you tell us what you want printed out, because it's going to be very expensive. Okay, well, is the income tax voluntary? That's another position. You can't answer that question yes or no at any given point. You need some substance behind it, but let's look what CCRA says about it. The income tax system is based on voluntary compliance. The myth is that this proves the government knows the law is unconstitutional and cannot be enforced. Can anybody here tell me the correlation between the first sentence and this last sentence? What does voluntary compliance have in relation to unconstitutional? When you start looking at this misdirection, this becomes very nonsensical, because maybe there is an element of truth here. Not the whole truth, it's not easy to think, but maybe there's an element here. So here's what they're telling you what the facts are. There is no question that voluntary compliance, which means free will compliance, is the cornerstone of Canada's self-assessment taxation system. So they're admitting something there. This simply means that the government expects Canadians to respect their legal obligations and fully comply with their tax obligations. That makes sense. The fact that the government, most Canadians, expect people to abide by the law does not imply the law cannot be enforced. That's rather redundant. In a small number of cases where taxes are not paid or not paid on time, the Income Tax Act and other laws provide a range of penalties and offenses such as tax evasion, smuggling, failure to pay, fines, disclosures, and you go, starting to get scared again? Okay, scare tactic, throw it in there. Okay, the Act gives CCRA powers in these cases. See, the Act gives them powers. They weren't born with this power, so you understand. It's the jurisdiction that we're going to be looking at. What jurisdiction, what powers were they given in that Act? Okay, in these cases to impose fines, make third-party claims, seize properties, prosecute through criminal process. On the other hand, taxpayers who come forward. Why use the word taxpayer? Why not clients? Why not individuals? Okay, who come forward voluntarily without having been investigated are usually eligible to pay their overdue taxes or custom duty with interest, but without any penalty. Okay, so that's the facts, the way they see them. Now here's something you'll find when you get these income tax forms. They usually have a thing in there to try to mix this thing, voluntary compliance versus voluntary disclosure. Okay, is there a difference? What is the difference? Okay, it says into the 1999 guide, if you have never filed a return, stop filing returns for 2 or more years, or sent us a return that was incomplete, we encourage you to voluntarily file or correct your return. We will then assess and reassess your return without applying a penalty. You will only have to pay the tax you owe with interest. If they had that much power, then why are, really, why are they giving you options to come and volunteer, right? If you ever phone them and talk to them and say, look, I have no receipts, don't worry, come on, we'll sit down, we'll figure something out. Are they being nice to you? How many people here know anybody that works there that's really nice? But you gotta start asking yourself questions. Which you are they talking about? Which you? Does this apply to you or does it apply to you? Or you? Which you? Okay? Well, I'm not going crazy. There's 2 yous. Now, this comes right out of their, we're still looking at this. Is this thing voluntary or not? Okay, and at what point, I guess. This is right out of Revenue Canada's Taxation Operational Public Policy Manual. Right here, Section 3. Now, look what they're actually saying. Our taxation system. Remember the Constitution, they can raise revenue by any mode or system, so they've called it a system. Based, as it is. What is based? Its foundation, its roots, its fundamental foundation on voluntary compliance. Okay, free will compliance. That's its foundational base. Places great importance on public manipulation, no, public affairs. Taxpayers can comply with the law only if they have sufficient information about what is required of them. They must also be aware that the Department will in all cases apply the law without bias toward any individual or group. Finally, because voluntary compliance necessarily involves programming, public affairs must do whatever it can to encourage or reinforce positive attitudes toward this self-assessment principle. So really, what is it? Is it a mandatory self-assessment system? That's what we're sort of proceeding. Or is it fundamental base things based on voluntary compliance? Even before the fact. So let's look at a few of these words. Voluntary, unconstrained by interference, unimpelled by another's influence, spontaneous, acting for oneself, proceeding from the free and unrestricted will of the person. Is this how you guys are filing? Unrestricted? No. Okay. Mandatory, containing a command, perceptive, imperative, peremptory. One to whom a mandate is given. One who undertakes without compensation to perform certain duties. Or is this how you're filing? Spending all this time filling out their paperwork for what? To save yourself. So we need to ask, can this be mandatory towards a natural person, towards you, who you believe you really are? UN Declaration of Human Rights. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. So what we need to look at is at what point is it voluntary and at what point is it mandatory? Because you can't answer that question yes or no, because you need to look at the conditions and find out where is that point, at what line, where's the line that you cross that changes it from voluntary, which it has to be or it would violate your human rights, to mandatory, which they say it is, but who are they talking to? Okay? So we're going to look into that one there a bit. Now here's another big issue here, and in the book I put like a lot of the reasons for judgment in there. And what this is, it's the judge and the natural person. What happened before I went to court, so it'd probably be a year and a half ago, one of these guys, an artificial entity, tried to take CCRA to court. Okay? Because he thought he was a natural person. And so what happened, he went and took CCRA to court and wanted his money back. Okay, so what happened, the judge, because he was caught in a catch-22, knows full well this guy has to pay taxes, but on the other hand, didn't want to expose the game of what's going out there, had to create reasons for judgments to pacify or neutralize the prosecutor's case, yet without making anything fact or law, just relied on a lot of opinion. So this happened back in July 20th, year 2000. Okay, it was between Thomas Kennedy. He had an agent. Remember we talked about agents. David Lindsay acting as his voice against Revenue Canada. So we're going to look at a few excerpts out of this one. And just with what we've learned up to date, now we're actually trying to utilize what we've learned up to date and try to see through. See, I was very fortunate that this case actually came up before I went to court. I had done enough study, but what this allowed me to do was get into the mind of a judge to see how they would actually think. And every reason for judgment he actually produced, I actually was able to establish where it was flawed. Either it was his opinion, it wasn't based on facts, it was based on something that didn't exist, this, that, or everything, and that gave me more confidence when I was heading to court. Okay? You'll understand the essence of this a little bit better, and if you get the book, it's so you can use it as a game. When you can actually go through all of his reasonings and find out what they truly are saying, you know you really have a handle on what's going on with this stuff. So the applicant, Thomas Kennedy, was employed as a teacher by the Ontario Carleton District School Board. So obviously they were taking taxes off of him. Okay? The application raised the issue whether the position taken by the applicant in his constructive notice to the Minister of National Revenue is correct. Is the payment of income tax a voluntary act? These are questions he wants settled in the court. Is a natural person a person included in the Income Tax Act who is subject to income tax? Okay? There's a double question on that one. Now, let's see what this judge, this learned judge, relied upon. We've seen the evolution, how words and everything and definitions can actually expand. The general statutory interpretation is that words and sentences must be construed in their ordinary meaning or common or popular sense. Well, we just looked at how many articles this morning with judges saying the opposite. You can't take a word in its ordinary natural meaning because you have to give it context. You have to read the whole act as a whole. You have to say what was its reason. Okay? But we read this on and we'll see where he picked this up. The rule is stated by Lord Tenterden, an Attorney General versus Winstanley, 1831. So he either relied, I don't know if this is a U.S. court case or if it's a British court case, but obviously it's not even in Canada because we weren't around at the time. But look at the year he had to go back when statutes were read and written in their natural and ordinary sense. Okay, this is a year 2000 court case and he's going that far back. Okay, there's clue one. That's like the most blatant one. Okay, for the simple fact he had to do that, you maybe want to start questioning, let's look at everything else under a microscope. Now, The use of the verb includes extends the definition to include a corporation. Extends it. What did we just learn about the word includes? It restricts it, it confines it. Okay? Now, the definition does not exclude a human being. In the French text of the Act, the meaning is even clearer. Personne physique ou morale. Personne physique is a natural person. So why would, okay, now here's a question. Why would, if in the French version, it actually says artificial person, natural person, yet in the English version, it doesn't even make clarification to a natural person, when we know it doesn't cost that much more money to print 10 more letters. Okay, yet we've seen throughout statute, they're not afraid of using these words. Well, remember we talked about common law and civil law? The underlying philosophy of common law is you were born with inalienable rights and you can only forfeit them voluntarily. What's the underlying philosophy of civil law? You only have rights given to you by the government. Why does Quebec have their own CPP plan, QPP, and the rest of Canada falls under CPP? You have two diametrically opposed philosophies trying to operate within the same structure. So, regardless of what that is saying, yeah, when you live in a province where you have no inalienable rights, they can go and throw that in there, no big deal. But when you live in a country with its essence is common law, where you have inalienable rights, that cannot be included. Canadian Bill of Rights will kick it out. Okay? So this is the judge's thing. I am therefore driven. He doesn't say, this is the law, here are the facts. He just says, because of how you directed me, I am now driven to the conclusion that it's an ordinary meaning in its common or popular sense that the word person in the statute includes both natural persons and corporations. See, just because a judge spoke it, we think, oh, it must be law because he said it. No, no. He said, look, I was just driven. You just gave me enough information to confuse me. Give me more. Okay? He says, I'm also driven to the conclusion that there's nothing in the context of the Income Tax Act or in the authorities to which Mr. Lindsay had referred me that would support the interpretation of the Income Tax Act. He said, I need more information. Okay? Intended the word person to be used in the narrowest sense by comprising only corporations or other artificial persons. You see, the nucleus of this course here was my defense I was going to court with. So I went through and I picked through every part. I made sure I could dispute everything this judge, because if the prosecutor came at me with it, I had to drive my judge down a different road. Okay? So there's actually like 24, 28, 30, they're all in the book, but you can literally go through each one and pick them apart, find out, you know, see through the illusion of what's going on. You got to ask yourself questions. Were you born a taxpayer? At what point did you become, were you born, the second you were born you were a taxpayer? When we started looking at that in reality, hey, no, we actually had to make an application somewhere down the line. Even if we worked someplace before we were a certain age, they can take taxes off. Hey, maybe there's some step along the way where we cross this line. Okay? So at this point, I just want to read this thing here, because this is a point where a lot of people get very frustrated and figure, I want to get all my money back that they took from me. Okay, what they did, they should have told me everything that we've learned up to now, right? So you read this Black's Law definition of fraud, and actually it sounds like your average meeting with CCRA. An intentional perversion of truth for the purpose of inducing another into reliance upon it to part with some valuable thing belonging to him, or to surrender a legal right. A false representation of a matter of fact, whether by words or by conduct, by false or misleading allegations, or by concealment of that which should have been disclosed, which deceives and is intended to deceive another so that he shall act upon it to his legal injury. Any kind of artifice employed by one person to another, a generic term embracing all multifarious means which human ingenuity can devise, and which are resorted to by one individual to get advantage over another, by false suggestions or by suppression of the truth, and includes all surprises, tricks, cunning, disassembly, and any unfair way in which another has been treated. Does that sound like your relationship with your local tax collector? Now, here's how they get around it, so don't waste your time going after them, because in their legal system there's another legal maxim. Remember, an absolute truth, no use arguing about it. Juris ignorante cum jus nostrum ignoramus. It is ignorance of the law when we do not know our own rights. It's not their job to teach you who you are and what your rights are. And that's why, like, last night was, in my opinion, the most important part of this whole thing. All these are just details now. When you know who you are, the rest is details. Okay? Because you can't blame anybody but yourself. I mean, when I was looking at this, I was blaming everybody. How could it be my fault? I didn't know anything. Right? But there is the reality of it. And I think if we can accept that reality of it, then we need to place the responsibility of who needs to get educated. It's up to us to educate ourselves and protect ourselves and quit relying on they to take care of us. So we'll have a little break. And so what we're going to look at here, we're going to start this second half off here with what's the natural person and the GST. How does GST and a natural person correlate? You know, is it a mandatory thing? Is it voluntary? What do you need to do? Okay? What I do, like with every statute I look at, the first thing I go to is the definition section. I first find out who they're talking about, what they're talking about, and what words mean different things than what I thought they meant. So what we're going to do, this is Part 9 of Goods and Service Tax Act, or the Excise Tax Act on the federal government. Okay, let's look at some of these words and try to get a base or a foundation for what we're going to be reading when we read the statute. Business includes a profession, calling, trade, manufacture, or undertaking of any kind whatever, whether the activity or undertaking is engaged in for profit, and any activity engaged in on a regular, continuous basis that involves the supply of property by way of license, lease, or similar arrangement, but does not include an office or employment. Okay, some of the words we're going to pick up the meanings later on, but let's look at this word commercial activity. Okay? Of a person means a business carried on by a person other than a business carried on without reasonable expectation of profit by an individual. So what's an individual unless it's redefined? We'll check that out later down here. Okay? So commercial activity is everything but an adventure or a business or anything that is engaged in by an individual without reasonable expectation of profit. Okay, so we need to start asking questions like, well, what is profit? Taxable supply means a supply that is made in the course of a commercial activity. What's a commercial activity? See, when we assume we know the meanings of some of these words, we're going to read right through them. Commercial activity is what we classified. Okay? A registrant means a person who is registered. An individual means a natural person. Okay, it's natural legal sense. Its natural ordinary meaning in the legal parameters is a natural person. So here's one question we can ask and look at later on is, why did they have to redefine it back within the Act itself if it naturally means a natural person? Here's a person, means an individual. So notice what they had to do. They had to first identify the natural person and then include him in the definition of the word person, because without that it only includes a corporation. So, but they wanted a natural person to have access to have the same advantage of being an unpaid tax collector as everybody else. Okay, so just with some of these words that we can keep referring back to them, but I think the couple that we really need to look at is when they use the word person, it does include a natural person at this point. Okay, that can be established because the natural person is an individual. So when they're using the word individual up there, it's a business carried on by a person other than a business carried on without a reasonable expectation of profit. So GST, basically you have to comply with the GST Act if you're in a business and you have decided you have a reasonable expectation of profit. You've made the decision what's going on. Okay? So you may want to try to review your definition of profit. Registration. So this who must register. Every person who makes a taxable supply in Canada in the course of a commercial activity. What's a commercial activity? A business engaged in other than a business engaged in without reasonable expectation of profit by an individual. Okay, so it goes under there. So that who must register. Okay, so we're going to unspin a couple of these words and look at what's a taxable supply. Taxable supply means a supply that is made in the course of a commercial activity. Notice how they're flip-flopping the words, but what's a commercial activity? Means a business carried on by a person other than a business carried on without a reasonable expectation of profit by an individual. So right there within the law itself, if you're actually just working for somebody, you know, on a contract basis, regardless what type of contract at this point, because it doesn't matter with this definition, if you have no reasonable expectation for profit, you're not required to be registered for GST. Okay? So let's look at this. Do you have a reasonable expectation for profit? GST is very simple and spin. You see, we could have brought the whole GST Act here and it would have been impressive, all this paperwork. But a lot of it's garbage and fluff when you're actually starting to look at it from who you are. Okay? So do you have a reasonable expectation for profit? So they know how you think. They know what's our whole motive. Because we've now created this illusion of money and we're all out there trying to make a profit. It's pumped into us. Make a profit, make a profit. Well, I think we really need to look at it. Here's Black's Law definition of profit: an advance in price of goods sold beyond the cost of purchase. The gain made by the sale of produce or manufactures after deducting the value of labor, materials, rents, and all expenses together with any interest and capital employed. So let's look at this scenario. You got a selling price of $10,000. Okay, your cost of materials was $2,000. Your cost of labor, other than your own, was $1,000. Now your own compensation. So now here comes the point of decision. How much are you worth? Notice how it's left to you to define your own value. They're leaving you to rely on the programming they know that already exists within your belief circles now to, for one, trigger your greed mechanism and go, oh, I want to make profit. Why don't you just look at getting compensated for all the time, effort, energy, and put a proper value on? How much? Okay, look at society in general. What is a human being worth? How much will they spend if you're lost up on a mountain? Okay? If you want to think, really, it's incomprehensible what the value of a human being is. How much is one of those big F-16s or big fighter jet, you know, with $1 billion, you know, way up there, right? Well, if you're not worth at least that, why do they have ejection seats in those? What is a human worth? So quit devaluing yourself. You understand why they don't want you to know what your true potential and your true value is? Because you don't fall into their game. Okay? So now you take this and all you minus, oh, we'll, just for this case, call you worth $1 billion. Okay? Obviously, you're in the hole. You have no expectation of profit, and at this rate, you never will. So, do you have to apply for GST? See how the law will speak for you when you understand what it's actually saying. Okay, a couple challenges with this is the challenge isn't what does the law say. The challenge is the mass ignorance that's out there. Most people that collect it, they're unpaid. What they've done, and here's the nice little, when you do a little bit of research on this, you know this Alberta Supreme Court appeal about GST. They took it to court, and then the Alberta Supreme Court said GST is legal. And that's what we hear, and we say, well, it's no use fighting anymore. I already went to court. And has anybody here read the actual court case and found out what was really going on? What was going on was, hey guys, you know, whether the whole thing was staged from both sides, just trying to make a nice show, because once you get a court thing, we all think, well, the court said this, so we must do it. What it was, we have a problem here. You're trying to get this whole country to be unpaid tax collectors. Whether that's in common law or not, you can't do that, because that'll violate contract law. You have to give them consideration. So what they do is like this: when you want to start up a business, they go, well, if you get a GST number, I mean, you're going to dump in, say, $20,000 or $30,000 to start up a business. I mean, you're going to be paying a lot on GST. So if you get a GST number, you'll get that GST back. Short-term gain, long-term pain. Now we got you. You have to file everything. You got to calculate everything. And boy, if you step out of line, we'll give you penalties. We'll give you this. We'll give you this. This is what specifically is caused. Now they can track every movement you make, everything. All for what? Short-term, the short-term gain of it. It's part of the thing. I'll give you this. Come on, sign it. You free will sign it. So you got to look at that in reality is that now if you're an incorporated company, it is a statute-created entity, and by law, it was only created to create profit. Okay, but in your own capacity, and this is the difference when you know who you are, in your own capacity, you need to put a value in yourself before you can even comprehend this increase in value, right? But if you never can attain that, if you can never get paid what you're worth, which when you truly know who you are, you can never get paid what you're worth, GST sits out there, right? Notice how things are going to start, you'll start seeing a common thread here. There will always be an interjection for a voluntary place where you actually have to apply for it. Do they go driving around neighborhoods or businesses with guns? No, you actually had to apply for this stuff. What they did, they held out a nice little carrot up front and said, we'll give you a little upfront money to help reduce the cost of the shift. That's how they got that through the Alberta Supreme Court thing. They gave what was called quid pro quo. They gave consideration to formate this contract. What if an incorporated company looks at it and says, look, I don't agree with the terms of your contract. This is not enough compensation or consideration in this. If you want me to sign this contract, theoretically it should work from an incorporation's point of view. Okay? If you want me to sign and apply to be an unpaid tax collector, I need more money for it. Start negotiating your own contracts, okay? And I think the best thing to do it is as a corporation, because as a natural person, why even bother? Why give them a stranglehold into your life and your livelihood? So that was it, GST. Before we're at a point now, this is like, I want every step along here. Does anybody have any questions at this point on this?
Let's create a little scenario.
Okay.
Okay, say we have Joey, worker man, and he's cleaning gutters. And he's not charging GST or whatever. And he's making boys cleaning a lot of gutters. And so they knock on his door. Okay, Joey, why haven't you been paying GST? What does Joey say?
Well, Joey says, well, I have no reasonable expectation for profit, so therefore I don't want to, if you think I have to, show me the law. You see, the battle stops, because when you understand all this, these things, nothing of these can hurt you. Okay, so we've unspun a lot of the general ones. Okay, here's one. If he knows this, he has like I said, we could have brought the whole Excise Tax Act in here. We don't need it. We just have to know the part that protects us. He walks in there and says, you know, I could be wrong. I mean, to err is human, so let's just take a look at it. He could says, you know, he just says, the law says, unless I have a reasonable expectation for profit, I'm not in a commercial activity producing a taxable supply. So therefore, I, according to section 240, do not have to register. Now, if I'm wrong, prove that to me.
Don't they have to register if the sales are over $30,000 a year? Not profit, but sales.
That is only if. Now, this is the. See, what we have is we have the two worlds. Here's the box. They like people to think inside the box. You ever notice if you're in school and you don't think inside the box, you don't fit in those, you really don't do good in school? And they got the rest, the reality, okay, over here. So, if you acknowledge that you're in a commercial activity, because you put a profit on here, they said, okay, yes, you have a commercial activity. Yes, you're making a taxable supply, and I guess you assume you're going to make a profit. But look, it's a lot of paperwork for us, so look, unless you make $30,000 a year in sales, don't bother. That's all the, now that in the box, out the box thinking correlates all the way through all their laws, because when we're talking contracting, you know, especially when it comes to income tax, people go, well, Revenue Canada will tell you whether you're an employee or whether you're a subcontractor. That's only in the box. Remember out here, nothing they can do will hurt you, can hurt you, right?
Because I have a situation where he didn't know about natural people, right? And he's reporting on his income tax. He's had $35,000, $37,000 worth of sales. And they've come back and assessed 3 years worth of GST on him, on his sales.
Right.
Now, is that because he's reported it as an artificial person on his income tax?
Probably, yeah. And this is what we were learning earlier about joinder. I mean, that's why we're going to get to a point, you know, some of you are going to say, well, hey, how far back can I do this, right? What can I do? And that, like I've been saying, it really comes down to what was your intent. Because if your intent was very powerful, you drew a line and you made no more joinder. And you know, and the reality of it is once you draw that line, if you end up owing money on this side of the line, there's no silver bullet. You know, I mean, we're all so trained. You know, we want drive-through freedom. You know, yeah, I would like, you know, give it to me. Here's, you know, the reality is if you're trying to obey the law, you have to obey the law. So what is a crucial part of law is intent. Was your intent to break the law, or was your intent to work in your own, as your own? So that's why each individual case will go to the point of, you know, did he make joinder with that through other forms? Voluntary joinder. And that's the sad part of it. All this was voluntary, yet we never knew it. Right?
So how do you get yourself out of that then?
Make a decision.
Okay, so you make, right now I make a a conscious decision.
Okay.
I want out.
In GST especially, you just go to the website, you punch in the thing to cancel your GST number. See, it's all joined with paperwork. Just get your paper. Remember, is your paperwork in order? Nothing much has changed, right? Instead of tattoos on our arms now, they give us little plastic cards. Okay, just get your paperwork in order for the entity. Understand this enough. I mean, this is how simple it is when you're, actually this one took me months because I found the crucial part, and it was, but for some reason I thought it was way inside the act, so I kept looking and looking, and it was right there in the definition section. Okay, but when you know what you're looking for, you're not reading the act for what it says, you're looking for where you protected. And that's why reading statutes it actually becomes fun, because you know the law says these things can't hurt you. So now you're on a journey. Hey, how am I protected? Right? So we've unspun most of them for you. And the one with GST is you're going to have to define what you're worth. And I highly suggest you know. Huh? It is quite reasonable. You're getting a deal. Oh, here, you want to put it in earth terms, I guess. You're worth as much as the highest paid person in this whole world. Do you know how you can prove that? UN Declaration of Human Rights says all persons are created equal. So if he's worth that, how much are you worth if all humans are equal? I mean, you want to get evidential supportive proof, you know, you want to cross that legalese thing. So now we're going to, any more questions on GST? That's it. That's the game, so, of GST. I know it wasn't that bad, was it? Okay. I mean, I could make these books real big and you waste y'all a lot of time, but that's about it on GST. Okay, we're going to cross the line here and we're going to look at this other thing called a social insurance number. Now we learned, Friday night that, it was brought in 1964 for a way for you to access benefits, primarily old age pension. And that's the only thing that was attached to it when it was brought in. So who had a problem signing up for that one? Right? 3-4 years later, they attached it to the Income Tax Act, 1967. So let's go. This information's out there. You'll find they know who you are so much, and they know that they can't deceive you, or that's fraud. They have to tell you the truth, but there are certain things you need to know. You need to understand capitalization, whether it's of words or whether it's of your name, what brackets, parentheses, stuff like this, right? So you can read things for how they're really written. So it says, welcome to our website. The social insurance number is a 9-digit number used to the administration of various Canadian government programs. You will require a social insurance number to work in Canada or to receive government benefits. Okay? Now we're going to read that the way they want us to read that. Okay, we're going to say, well, if I want to work in Canada, I need one of these. Or if I want to receive government benefits, I need one of these. Okay? So we're going to say if that's exactly what it says, or it says they haven't defined what work is, what kind of work, what conditions, what the terms, what's this, what's that. It's just they throw a word in there and we attach it to ourselves. Okay? Frequently asked questions. Now this is very important because when you understand, you got two choices. When you understand the game going on, you can run and hide from this card, try to throw it away, try to send it back. We need to also look at it is this thing really that detrimental? First sight, we actually get very scared of it. But so let's look and learn what that card actually is, at least to a degree. So here's some frequently asked questions. What is the importance of the name appearing on the social insurance number? And you all thought it was your name, right? It is important that the names and the social insurance number under which you are working, you're submissive to this card now. When you look at the word understand, the word under, you start realizing some words are very powerful, and that's where they're using them. Under which you are working. Well, what if you're working over this card? Start asking, right? Well, no, I'm working under the authority of this card now, okay? Which you are working are identical to the name and social insurance number that appear on your social insurance card. So the number that you're working with, make sure it matches the number on the card. And the name that you're using to work, make sure it matches the name on the card. Do you know why? Because the natural person can wake up tomorrow and pick a whole different name. But if he want to work with that card, he has to make sure he's being employed with the name that's on that card. When you spin your rights within the game, they hate human rights. You guys got way too many of them. Okay? This will ensure, here's the benefit, that your Canada and or Quebec pension plan contributions are properly credited to you. So here's your carrot, boys and girls. Okay, so who can ask for my social insurance? This becomes very important. This thing has very limited jurisdiction, okay? Anyone can ask for your social insurance number. There's no law saying they can't, right? Where's the law saying you can't ask? Okay? Canadians find themselves asked for their social insurance numbers by landlords, stores, libraries, even hockey teams. However, you do not have to give it to them. Stand up for who you are and what your rights are. Well, who must I give it to? There are few federal laws which require you to give a social insurance number for specific purposes. Old age security, unemployment insurance, Canada pension plan, contributions or claims. The original purposes for social insurance. Okay, that's what was brought in to access and utilize the benefits of the country, not to enslave you. Or that was the guise it was brought under. Because trust me, if they brought it in and say, guys, get these cards, you get to pay income tax the rest of your life. You want one? Okay, for income tax identification 3 years later. To your employer who sends contributions to UI, CPP, and income tax. Okay, only if he sends contributions, obviously. To banks, trust companies, and stockbrokers when they sell you financial products, examples, GICs or Canada savings bonds, or services, bank accounts that generate interest. Now this is what we're taught. We're taught if you cannot get a bank account without a social insurance number that generates interest, because that's what it says. But it's obviously, it's a truth, but maybe it's not the whole truth. You see, when you create deception, it is so easy to create deception because you just keep 80% of the truth in there and you just twist it a little bit with half-truths. So you can no longer, you know, it sounds good, it sort of makes sense. Okay, it must be the truth. Okay, so we're going to look at this and you'll be able to judge for yourself if this is the whole truth or only half the truth, especially on that one. And for various Veteran Affairs benefit programs and for Canada student loans. And there's like a few more. You can go on the website. But that's it. That is what your card was created for, period. Anybody else wants it? Tell them where to go. Now, if they don't listen to you, why do other organizations ask for my social insurance number? Many stores, financial institutions, and even landlords use a social insurance number to check your credit rating. Credit bureaus use social insurance numbers as credit file numbers. Other organizations simply use it as a client number to save them setting up their own numbering system. And finally, it has simply become a bad habit. It's on the form and no one knows why. Creatures of habit, quite convenient. What can happen if I refuse to give my social insurance? If you refuse, the organization may deny you service. This is not illegal, even though successive federal privacy commissions and parliamentary committees have said it should be. So what can I do when asked for my social insurance number? Ask if you're required by law to provide it. And you see the list above. So you do your own due diligence, find out what the true requirements are. So if someone asks, you can say, yeah, well, show me the law that I have to, and I'll be more than glad to. Because now you're dealing from a point of knowledge, and they're most likely speaking out of a point of ignorance still. Good ignorance, not bad ignorance, just the nice word of ignorance, naivety. Ask why the person needs it and how will it be used and to whom it will be given. If not required by law and you are not satisfied with the explanation, tell the person you prefer not to use a social insurance number and offer other identification. Notice how there's a lot of your free will. If you're not satisfied, right, you tell the person what to do. It's all up to you. It's all about you. This is where you got to switch from this hoping they're going to take care of you to say, look, jig's up, I better start taking care of myself, because they really don't care. If the organization refuses to give you the product or service unless you give your social insurance number, complain to the senior management and possibly to your provincial or federal privacy commissioner or ombudsman if there is no commissioner. Okay? They're saying, look, you guys getting a hassle, give us a call. That's what we're being paid for. Not everything is bad, but not every, it's like out of this whole illusion. It's very hard to distinguish what's the truth, what's the bad, what's the good, where's the good intent, where's the bad intent. If you would like better legal protection for your social insurance number, call or write your federal member of parliament. Not the one that stands in front of the window and go, my kingdom. He probably wouldn't understand this. Primary documents required. Now you say, okay, here's a unique thing in Canada. See, in the US, you're born, you get something like this. One of those little tracking cards. Canada, you can actually become you don't need one of these until, see, our system is so different than this. That's why it took them 4 years to institute income tax in our country, and they were able to do it right away in the United States. So you can be a Canadian citizen without having one of these, right? You can be a registered Indian without having one of these. You can be a Canadian citizen born outside of the country with because these are, you can be a permanent resident without having one. These are some of the documents you need to even get one of these. Okay? So you aren't born an officer or a taxpayer. So how did this guy get created? You probably have in your wallet anywhere from 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 different artificial people. That's your unlimited capacity. At any moment you can say, today I want to be a driver. Okay, I'll drive my car. Okay, then you get out of your car and I'm going to now be a voter. I'll go and vote for, you know, the CEO of this corporation. Right? That's what your concept of your capacity. You pick and choose your capacities that you're working. Oh, today I'm going to work in my capacity as this guy. Tomorrow I'll work in my own capacity. Okay? So how did they create an officer? Let's look at the Canada Pension Plan Act. What's an employee? It includes an officer. Employer means a person liable to pay salary, wages, or other remuneration. Okay? Employment means the performance of services under an expressed or implied contract of service. So you understand what these acts are? These are permission slips to create something, to give it life, to give it, it cannot do anything unless it's being allowed to by law. So it can enter into employment under a contract of service for remuneration. That's all it's allowed to do. Remember the doctrine of strict literalism? Just specifically what it says, what can it say to do? It can perform services under an expressed or implied contract of service. Okay, or it can be an apprenticeship, and it includes the tenure of an office. That's its limitation, that's its jurisdiction. It can't do whatever you want it to do. Now, how did you get one of these? Is it mandatory to get one? Now we see this word individual again. So initially we're going to assume 80% of the time we'll be right, that it means a natural person. But remember that section 15 of the A of the Interpretation Act? Maybe there's a related subject matter act that has already redefined that word. Okay, so you've got to look pension. This is about pension. Let's look at other pension plan acts, and really there's very little, and it all spins out being the same anyways. But that's how you unspin and check some of this stuff for yourself. Okay, we're going to put in what the actual word means. Every natural person who is required by the act to file an application with the minister or to apply to the minister for the assignment to him for a social insurance number must do so. So something you're doing is going to make you required that makes you must do this. See, it doesn't say every individual must or every individual shall, which means every natural person shall do this. It just says every individual who is required. Well, what did you do that made the requirement come into place that you had to go and actually apply for one of these? Something you did. Okay? So we're going to look at that. Now we're going to look at this here. Every individual who expects to be an individual required by the act. Okay? So you got two things. If you do something that requires you to get one, you better get it. Or you can go and get it if you expect you might do something that will require you to get it. Okay? Now when you look at words, you know, this is why I underline this word expects. That's really, why is that word? A friend of ours, actually, her uncle worked for the Manitoba legislature. They said they would spend with lawyers, you know, 5 dozen lawyers, judges, all this, 5 months on a single word. These things are not written by some guys in there writing a little short story. They're constructed, they're built to obey all these principles that we learned about. The rules of construction, they are a work of art. And you need to respect them to that point or they're going to hurt you. So let's look at this. Every individual who expects, what's this word expects? When you expect something to happen, are you predicting? Okay? So something you might expect that'll happen will make you required to get one of these numbers. So, assigned to him a solution, he may. Okay, so this becomes very permissive. So to get this card is total voluntary act. You have to make the decision. Okay, now what are we taught? You want a job, you better get one of these numbers. Isn't ignorance beautiful? Perpetuating ignorance, you just tell them, guess what we're going to tell our kids? You want a job? Better go get one of these numbers. Have we ever read the law? No, but they told me to tell you, and it's beautiful. It just keeps going, generation. And Matt, excuse me, what did they do before 1966? What did they tell your kids? You want a job? You better go. Oh no, we don't have numbers yet. Okay, but you give us 20, 30 years on that, and look at how we're now we got employers thinking that nobody can work without one. We got employees thinking we quickly want to enslave our kids. Here, get with the program. Get inside the box, right? So we need to look at the reality of this, and I think a little scenario, what I'll do with it is, if we release this concept of the social insurance and look at it in more of a something more fun here. Well, that's what's happening. Say I had a vacation plan, okay, and this was like one of those timeshare type of things. I said, look, if you guys sign up here, I'll give you a card, okay, and it's a vacationer's card, and with this you get to access all my different luxury resorts, okay. You know, it'll cost you very little. You know, I'll actually give you something to sign up. I'll give you a free planter and a wall picture or something, you know, just to get, it's all for your benefit. You'll love this. Now, the only requirements that are attached to it, that is, if you go to one of my vacation places during the year, I need a report at the end of the year. Okay, if you go and you need a report, tell me how much fun you had. Now, if you have my card but you don't go to any of my vacation reports, then you don't have to file unless I write you and ask you for a filing. Okay, so those are the ground rules. Okay, now of that I'll give you a few benefits here and there and stuff like that, but there's contractual obligations. That's what I need from you. So you agree, and this is like, how can I lose? This is great, I get all these discounts. So you come forward and you sign up because you expect you may be taking a vacation this year. It was a total prediction. Okay, you voluntarily joined into my vacation plan. So the end of the year comes by, and yeah, you went on holidays, but none of them were to my fancy vacation resorts. Okay, but that year, even though you didn't have to file, you know, so why should I bother? I didn't go anywhere. But I just happened to send you a letter and say, hey, you know, I politely request you to file. If you don't, I'll demand it. Because we have a contractual obligation, right? Come on. And so I send you a nice little demand letter because you didn't really think the first one was threatening enough. And so, you know, all I want is the truth. Okay, with my card, at my vacation things, when you were vacationing with my card, because that's all this contract relates to, how much fun, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much fun did you have? Come on, you didn't even go anywhere. 0. You went to grandma's, but not to my place. You see, so that was the jurisdiction, the parameters of this card. If something you're doing, basically, if you're working, representing an officer under a contract of service for remuneration, you have contractual obligations and you better obey them, because you did this all voluntary because you expected it. So isn't that why you applied for it? I mean, yeah, they handed out a few carrots up front which enticed you. Okay, that's how this guy was created. So you know where he is, you know who you are, and it's all going to start coming together. Pieces of the big puzzle. CPP was joined to the income tax in 1967, right? Few little, again, here's the nice, great little card. You get all these free benefits, this, that, and everything, and then they go in and make the attachment. Now, we got two choices here. We can either spend the rest of our life trying to read this and understand this and hope we're going to obey the law, or we can spend the time we spent basically today to understand how these things are written, so that when we actually read this here, Section 2 of the income tax, that we actually know what it's actually saying. We're not reading it and attaching our own personal emotions to it. An income tax shall be paid. Okay? Shall, we know that as a must, so it must be paid. Okay, so there are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. As required by the Act, not as required by the Motor Vehicle Act. It's just, you see how restrictive, these are very restrictive concepts here. On the taxable income. So taxable income is defined as anything that's left over after you run Section B, Section C, this, that, and everything, and what's the bottom line. Okay? So not everything else, okay? For each taxation year of every person resident in Canada at any time of the year. Normally we think we already know what this means because we know what Canada is. Well, we think we did. We thought we knew what person was, so we read it the way they wanted it to be read. Okay? And we look at that and we see this shall, even if maybe somewhere along the line we picked up that shall was an imperative, right? And we look at that and go, man, I spent months thinking, I can't see any way around that. You know, that's where this guilt of, well, maybe I should pay unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So when we start looking at these, we're actually going to try to find the source of definitions of all these and actually build the picture, create the jurisdiction of what Revenue Canada is. But before we do that, let's jump to the British Columbia Income Tax Act. Well, here's the first question. Which British Columbia is this? Because we all know full well the federal government cannot enter into an agreement with the provincial government So how is this all happening? And maybe this is the federally incorporated British Columbia? Oh, well, British Columbia means the Corporation of British Columbia, right? Not the province of British Columbia. Corporation has the same meaning in the Federal Act. Employed has the same meaning in the Federal Act. Hey, why create new rules to a game that works beautiful? Let's just repeat the same thing, same thing, same thing. Individual means a person other than a corporation, includes a trust estate defined by Section 104 of the Federal Act. Person, or any word expression descriptive of the person, has the same meaning of the Federal Act. And here's one thing that's quite unique, because the word person in provincial statutes has that party. Remember, you're a party, that you can make joinder to it? Okay, but here they wanted it to carry that same meaning as that Federal Act. Okay, so understanding there's no use spending time on spinning the BC Income Tax Act or probably any other provincial income tax act, because it probably repeats the same thing. Like, why reinvent the rules of the game when you're basically just trying to double tax people anyways? So let's just focus on this. Okay, so what does the income tax really say? Okay, I think maybe by now, when we're faced with all this, we start understanding why we had to learn everything we had to learn yesterday, this morning, and this up to this point, because we'd spend months trying to figure out what this says without that information. So let's look at this word business. Business includes a profession, calling, trade, manufacturing, undertaking of any kind, whatever, except for the purpose of this, an adventure, concern. So basically very broad, but it does not include office or employment. Okay, so let's draw that out here. We'll call this a business. Okay, that's a business. Anything you can think of, right? Corporation includes an incorporated company. So what's a corporation? Whenever you use the word corporation, here's 3 important words. This helps you release the emotion. In this act. In this act, these words mean this. Quit taking it personal, quit dragging it into other parts of your life. Okay? Keep jurisdiction. You got to get a real good picture of jurisdiction. We'll call this the act. If it's not within the box, don't drag it out. Because when you take a word out of this box, it could mean something different. Okay, so corporation includes an incorporated company. Okay, so we have a business that has formed an incorporated company. Okay, we're all following that? Okay. Employed means performing the duties of an office or employment. Okay, so the incorporated company employed some people. I guess he looks like he has 2 options. You can employ him through an office, or you can employ him through employment. Okay? Employee includes an officer. Okay, so I think logically that should then fit under here. The officer works in the office. Everybody following? Okay. Employer, in relation to an officer, means the person from whom the officer receives the officer's remuneration. So let's look at this. Whether this an incorporated company, is he an employer? So we're going to ask the question, is he an employer? Well, we have to look and say, if this incorporated company, does he have a relationship to an officer? In this diagram, he does. He has an officer working for him, so yes, we can call him an employer. But he could have 100 people working for him and none of them are officers. Then by the Income Tax Act of Canada, would he be an employer? Does the law say he's classed as an employer then? It says no, you're only an employer if there's a relation to an officer, which it means the person from whom this officer receives the officer's remuneration. That's it. That's what the law says. Don't put emotion, don't take it and this is, it's a hard thing probably for us to do. It's like, that's all it says, right? Employment now. Let's look at this other side. Means the position of an individual. And we'll have to check individual. Could be mean the position of a natural person. In the service of some other person, including Her Majesty or foreign state or sovereign. And servant or employee means a person holding such a position. Okay, so let's check to see what an individual is. It means a person other than a corporation. So we already know a corporation is an incorporated company. Check. Okay, so an individual means everybody that has to pay tax out of here except for the incorporated company. They just shifted them over as a different type of entity. Or when they use the word individual. Okay? So maybe we best jump down to the word person. Now, I think up to now we've seen how very easy it is to include you, a human being, a natural person, in the statute. How many letters is it? I don't know, just that many letters, right? Very easy. It's very easy. Like you want to just remove all controversy. Just put per individual means a natural person. Hey, we've seen him do it in the Excise Tax Act, right? So person, or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes any corporation, okay, which we acknowledge that, and any entity exempt because of Section 149. You can peruse through that. That's tax-exempt corporations that we know of. Under Part 1, on all or part of the entity's taxable income, and the heirs, executors, and administrators, or legal representatives of such a person. So if we're in there, we've got to be in there on one of these categories. How many people are legal representatives of people, as far as you know? Okay, so I mean, we look at that and we say, well, that can't be us either. So we have three choices here. You're either an incorporated company. Yes, that's a yes or no. You're the tax-exempt entity, but you're not in Section 149. Trust me, I looked. Don't trust me, go read yourself. Okay, or you're maybe this legal representative, but we already know what a legal representative is, or do we? Let's check out what a legal representative is. We assumed we knew what it meant. Let's see what it really is. A legal representative of a taxpayer. Okay, is a legal representative a taxpayer, or is it a legal representative of a taxpayer? See the distinction? Could I possibly be the legal representative of that taxpayer? That doesn't make me the taxpayer in my own capacity. Maybe it makes him the taxpayer and I'm just doing stuff for him. So let's see if we can find ourselves in there. Means a trustee in bankruptcy, an assignee, a liquidator, a curator, a receiver of any kind. That's very broad, right? What if I got $1 for him? Did I receive something for him? That's how neutral and broad it is. Let's see what I can do with that. A trustee, an heir, an administrator, an executor, a committee, or any other like person. Administering, winding up, controlling, or otherwise dealing in a representative or fiduciary capacity with the property that belongs or belonged to, or that is or that was held for the benefit of the taxpayer. Okay? Now how can this guy work? What is his authority to work? He can work under a contract of service in the capacity of an officer for remuneration. We're clear with that? How did we make, where do we fit in this picture? Well, but he's very, take a look at him. How long do you think he'd last on a job site? So he needs somebody to work for him. Oh, gee, I'll volunteer and I'll be his legal representative. Don't worry. Tell me what you want me to do for him. Just keep paying him. Okay? So let's back this up and try to fill this other. What is about this employment? Maybe we follow under there. Employment means the position of an individual. So now we've established, you know, from a couple sources, we'll look at that later on, that an individual here does not mean its natural thing of a natural person. And servant or employee means a person holding such a position. Okay, so what employment effectively is, you're either working, and this is where the working as an officer or as a servant, creating maybe a master-servant relationship. Okay, so maybe this includes a lot of your self-employed officers. They first enter into a contract of servitude and then re-employ themselves within their own sole proprietorship. Okay, so how does this guy get paid? Well, let's check out an office. Means the position of an individual, entitling the individual to a fixed or ascertainable stipend or remuneration, and includes the judicial office, the office of the Minister of Crown, the office of member of the Senate or the House of Commons of Canada, a member of the Legislative Assembly, or a member of a legislative executive council, and any other office, the incumbent which is elected by popular vote, and includes the position of a corporation director. So the director of this incorporated company, although it was a natural person that applied for the incorporated company to become now a director, is also included in here. And officer, which means a person holding such a position. So what we've seen is we've really limited who's actually included in that Income Tax Act. And we look at this and say, okay, this looks very restrictive to just what if I work. So how can they charge me taxes on investments, or on my bank account, or on rental property? You know, where did they get the jurisdiction for that? You want the power of one little word here? Salary or wages, except to Section 5 and 63 in the definition death benefit in this subsection means the income of a taxpayer from an office or employment. Okay? So the taxpayer, one of these guys, from an office or employment, as computed under Division A of Division B of Part 1, and includes all fees received for services not rendered in the course of the taxpayer's business. This job is the taxpayer's business, but this taxpayer, he goes and he gets a bank account with interest. Okay, he has a rental income. He did this. You just happen to be working for the benefit of him. Okay, rental income on property. R.I.P. Yeah, right. Okay, that's how they make the joinder for what this simple restrictive jurisdiction of the taxpayer is to everything else that it's attached to. But it needs to be attached to him. And he doesn't do anything because he's really not that mobile. He needs someone to do it for him. Okay, that's it. I mean, there's no like fireworks or anything. This is how simple it is. This is the jurisdiction of CCRA. See, these are permission slips. CPP Act is the permission to create this guy. Okay, and what's his benefit? When he gets old, he gets X amount of the money that he put in. Over his lifetime, he will probably put in $300,000 if he maxed out every year. Okay? Now, they didn't tell him the details up front, but say if he works to 65, okay, and say if he lives to average, what is it, the average male now, 76? We'll even go 20 years. Okay, we'll let him live to 85. Maximum he can pull out is $10,000 a year. Okay, 10,000 times 20 years is $200,000. I don't know who's this guy's investment manager, but I think someone should do change the batteries in their calculator. Okay, this is the reality of this little game they got, and that's if everything works the way it works. Okay, the reality is they're running $6 billion in deficit every year on the CPP program, and we're just voluntarily keep dumping the money in hopes that maybe, you know, someone will take care of us when we're older. Not likely it's going to happen. Now, what is a taxpayer? Includes any person, whether or not liable to pay taxes. If we read this in its natural and ordinary sense, that means you were born a taxpayer. Okay? We all know that, whether we know anything about any of this or not, that is not the truth. Okay? So that shows you how when you actually quit reading these things with emotion, what they actually mean. If they wanted us to pay taxes, you just put a natural person as a taxpayer, that's it, leave it alone. Right? So we're not going to spin through these, but basically, here you are. You're the legal representative of a taxpayer. You are not the taxpayer yourself. That is the taxpayer. You're the legal representative of this taxpayer. Okay? And how did you do this? What is the Black's Law definition of a legal representative? Although this one supersedes it, but the term in its broadest sense means one who stands in place of and represents the interest of another. So there's this little entity that sits in your wallet or your purse, and you wake up every day and you stand in place of and represent him for his interest, his benefit. But he has a lot of contractual obligations he better obey if you use them or not, so you better sort of know that. And how does this happen? Remember this voluntary act of joinder? Joining or coupling together, uniting two or more constituents or elements into one, uniting one person in some legal step or proceeding, like an application form. Okay? And how do they get away with it? Juris ignoranti est cum jus nostrum ignoramus. It is ignorance of the law when we do not know our own rights. It's not their fault you did this. Here's the sad reality of this. You know, I'd like nothing better to say, hey, everything in the past, you're going to send it back, just fill out this paper, life's going on. No, reality of it is, they used our most powerful tool, our right to contract, our free will, and they used it against us. Okay? We actually put some trust into some people, and that's why we elected them. We thought we could trust them. Well, somewhere down the road, that trust got violated, and it's caused a lot of people a lot of pain and anguish. You know, and this is the thing is, this guy has no feelings. This guy doesn't need to eat. This guy doesn't need dignity. This guy has no human rights. That's why they don't care what the law says that he must do and obey. And that's why when we start quit taking this thing personally, okay, look at what it applies to him and just stop voluntarily using him to go to work. So here's this little bit of proof here. How do we know? Okay, here comes this thing. How do we know? How do we know all this stuff, up to this point, what we learned, has any substance or truth? When we look at our whole society, everything we do really is based on rules and procedure. So we're going to look at procedure of everything we do. Everybody's comfortable with this. Okay, this here, I'm erasing it. This is it. This is the equivalent of, I'm going to get an artist to draw me it because it says, the picture's worth 1,000 words, but I'm going to do a layman's attempt at it. There's a big monster here. Right? These are claws, right? That's Fred Flintstone. This is this big monster, you know? And here we are over here quivering and shaking because we look and we see this big shadow. And that's what we think CCRA is, this big monster. Because we're looking at it through an illusion. When reality, okay, I don't know how that works, but here's a flashlight. Okay, and it's just shining light on this little thing with jurisdiction and casting this massive shadow. And if we don't actually go, you know, and see what reality is and learn. Is it getting better? But that's it. It's what we are afraid of is what we manifest within ourselves. If we go and look at what the law actually says and look at how we're supposed to read in these things and how they're written, we can look at what reality says. Okay? So that's like that Scooby-Doo cartoon, you know, but that's about it. Now you know why I envy artists. But a hard time drawing a straight line with a ruler. So what we're going to do is look at how our whole life is structured, our whole society worldwide is structured with procedure, all the way from grade 1, grade 2, all the way up. We're trained with this because we need that to live within a society, to create some organization and format. Let's go all the way back to English. What are we taught? Okay? How do we know this is a name? How can you prove that in court that that is the name? How can you know, why isn't someone going to come into court and say, no, that's a female deer. And you go, no, that's my last name. No, that's a female. Where's the proof? Because we know by obeying the rules of English construction, which are well established, universal, worldwide. When you capitalize the first letter, what's capitalized? To take advantage for your own use. The first letter, you've made it a person, place, or thing. Okay? You have now established that. Okay? So, if you want to look at the reverse, here's a challenge for anybody. Short of that capitis diminutio, which is all Latin and very hard to understand, you go find any rule of English construction which acknowledges, accepts, or authorizes the use of full capitalization. It doesn't exist. It can't exist. You go look at some of these manuals and go to professors in college. There's no source that acknowledges and does that, except for that capitis diminutio. If you went, what do you have a better chance of proving of which is right? You have more verifiable proof that this is a name and not, right? And this is a name and not just a slang for an outhouse. Because you've obeyed the rules of construction. And there's your evidence to prove that. Okay? Math is actually quite the symbol. Let's look at reasonable confusion. 4 plus 4 is 8 times 4 is 32. Whether it's right or wrong, is that reasonable? Okay? 4 times 4 plus 4 equals 20. Let's look at this. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 4 is 20. Is that reasonable? Here we have two reasonable interpretations of something. You know, on the surface, they look reasonable. Well, how do we know what's right? Okay, if we went to court, how would we know? Because we'll follow the principles of the mathematical principles of interpretation, I guess. You remember learning this in school, a little thing called BODMAS? Brackets off, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. If you do it that way, you'll be right and everything else is wrong. There's your proof of which one's right. So what's brackets off? There's no brackets. Division, no division. Multiplication. 4 times 4 is 16. Addition, plus 4 is 20. So this one's right, right? Okay? So as much as this feels right, and you want to attach emotion to it, if you do not have some basis to support your interpretation on, good luck arguing it. Okay? So you have to know, how would you say, something that you can cross-reference, cross-check, and try to figure out, are you included in that Income Tax Act? Because it's no use, whatever I say is really immaterial. You have to know whether you're in there or not before you can move forward. And this is where this concept of free will. You know, a lot of people have gotten in trouble listening to people say, here, fill out this form, send it in, and they'll never have to charge you income tax again. Oh, good, a silver bullet, thank you. Well, it takes me 10 minutes, I'm free. It's not like that. That's not reality. Okay? So I'm trying to give you some tools here that you can take home, and you can actually then move this to a level within your own self as to what you truly believe. So we already know up to this point, out of the Canadian Law Dictionary, an individual, its natural legal meaning is a natural person, right? It says that under the Canadian Bill of Rights, the right of an individual extends to natural persons only. Okay? Not any of these artificial ones. Here's our first clue, right? The scope and meaning of individual has also been interpreted in other statutes, i.e. Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and the Income Tax Act. Clue 1. Okay? Now what we're going to look at is this word individual, because that's that only thing that one word that could have that doubt. Well, maybe individual does mean a natural person. So we're going to really examine that word. The Income Tax Act, what does it mean there? Individual means a person other than a corporation. Well, that could include me. Okay, so we need to look at that. Now we have this is where this question mark popped up earlier in the Excise Tax Act. Individual means a natural person. So we look at that and say, well, if an individual means a natural person in its ordinary legal sense, why'd they have to even redefine it and put it in their first place? Why didn't they just write individual? Remember those principles of interpretation we looked at earlier? 15.1 and 15.2 and C, I believe it is? Where an enactment contains an interpretation section or provision, it shall, which means it must, okay? No more emotion involved. It must be read and construed as being applicable to all other enactments relating to the same subject matter unless a contrary intention appears. So, this is where we need to do this high-speed spin here. What we have is the Income Tax Act. That, because it did not want to have the word individual carry its natural legal meaning, i.e. a natural person, it redefined it for confusion. Originally in the 1917 Act, individual did mean a natural person. We've seen that. Probably around 1949 it changed, because there was an amendment to the Act around that time. Somewhere it changed. It had to change primarily because I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 1948 I think is when they passed that other act. So we raise the question, why is individual redefined as its own self natural person in the Excise Tax Act? When we obey this law, when they wrote the Excise Tax Act, they wanted to put a provision in there so you as a natural person, once you determine the concept of profit, could apply to collect GST. So they needed you included in there to give you the option to apply for it. So what they had to do is they had to redefine it back to its original state, its natural and ordinary legal meaning. Because if they didn't, it would automatically, by law, carry the meaning carried over from the Income Tax Act, because Section 15.2 says it must do that. Okay, that's spinny, right? Okay. So individual in the Income Tax Act does not mean a natural person. Individual in the Excise Tax does mean a natural person. You'll find a lot of statutes, i.e. the CPP Act, which uses the word natural person but has no definition for it. Because what it does, it picks up its natural legal meaning. 80% of the time it means a natural person. So what happened is, why would, if you ask this question, why would the Excise Tax Act have to put its ordinary legal meaning within the definition section? Why didn't it just continue on writing individual? Why did it have to redefine it back to what it was originally, its normal legal meaning? The reason is because Section 15.2 says it must. Where an enactment contains interpretation section or provision, it shall be read and construed as being applicable to all other enactments relating to the same subject matter unless a contrary intention appears. So had they not have redefined individual back to its original meaning, which is the contrary intention, it would have automatically, by law, carried the meaning of the word individual out of the Income Tax Act, which is not a natural person, and therefore they don't have a natural person included in the Excise Tax Act. When you run that whole thing backwards is, if the word individual in the Income Tax Act does mean a natural person, then why would they have had to put it back in the Excise Tax Act, for one, if its natural meaning is, and for two, if it would automatically, by law, carry the same meaning? Does that make a little bit more flip-flop sense? This is very creative that they've done, but it's very confusing. Okay? Now it comes to the point. We're going to talk about this. What if this is wrong? Right? We're all afraid, right? We all have this layer of fear coded. What if it's wrong? Okay, we're going to talk about this thing of intent. How many people here, we'll assume you guys are the jury, and I just presented, and there's a judge saying, no, I just presented a case. Is there a reasonable doubt that I may be right? And even if I'm not right, say if the prosecutor stands up and says, oh, no, no, you never checked this act out here. It says, look, you're born a slave. Everything you make, half's ours. Leave it alone. Okay, when that surfaces. Okay? So, but let's go on there. What if I'm wrong? Do you see any criminal intent applied to here? We're going to talk about that. When you understand what intent is, you don't have, we're human. We don't have to always be right. Unless an act specifically says your intention, regardless of your intention, you've committed a crime. And we're going to need that because, again, all these pieces will add up to the end where you got enough strength to start dissolving this circle of fear around you because it's been coded on for years and move forward with some confidence, with some knowledge. So we're going to, in the book, there's a couple really interesting readings. They're a page and a half, 2 pages each, and they're, how would you say, articles that I found around. One of them, it shows you what's going on, like Finance Minister Paul Martin repeats like, you know, if we create our, he's totally aware of this. He's totally aware they have the jurisdiction to create the money. But he keeps saying, well, if we create our own money, we'll just create inflation, right? This inflation, deflation, it's part of the illusion. Because when you understand, if you have the ability to create money, you release money into the system, right? When the country needs the money. You pull it back when there gets too much. You can actually control inflation because you're not attaching interest rates to it. When you start attaching interest rates to it, you're getting this fictitious debt. You're not getting anything produced. It becomes so you need to read that, and that really gives you a look of the government awareness of the problem and the repetitive answer that's been going on for years: inflation, deflation, inflation, inflation. Okay. Now, if you want to sort of have an overview of what, how this all came about and what the what one possible answer to this whole scenario that we're living in, you know, and you need to bear in mind what we feel is our history and in reality is such a drop in time in the whole world. There have been periods of time, 400 times as long as the whole establishment of our country, that have run and lived under this concept explained, under lack of usury and taxes. I mean, that is hard for us to comprehend, living in a society with no taxes. Well, how, you know, we're trained, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? You need to really spend some time, and if you can get these. This here was one of the articles that was in that Michael journal that I got back in 1993. It's a beautiful, easy to read, nice little tropical beach story type of thing. And it really shows you how slick the game is and how easy it is to institute and how the naivety of the people can allow it to happen. Okay, we're going to let that digest with you and try to run that stuff through your head, talk about it. That's why we're trying to put a break in between these, because if we download too fast, it's just going to hurt. Okay, try to spin that through your head so when you come back, that stuff's settled away and we can focus on your right to contract.